So now that you're finished all your boarding, now you're ready to do some mudding and taping. So let's run through the tools required to do that. Now to start, a good investment is just the little tape reel. I found this super handy. I did a few jobs without it, and you're always just putting the tape down and there's nowhere to put the roll. So this is handy. I do like using real tape over the mesh. The mesh stuff works well because it is easy. It's just like self-adherent. You just put it on and over your joints and then mud over it. I just found if you don't have enough mud on there, you can see the mesh through, and especially when you finish your sanding, if you see that mesh, you'll see it in your paint, right? I just like using the tape. I find it works the best, and that's what the professionals use. So let's just go over here. Now, like a 4-inch putty knife works really well for your taping, so actually applying your tape, applying your mud while you tape, angles or inside corners, that kind of thing. So those are handy for that. Now, I use a tray like this when I'm taping, so it's just somewhere to keep your mud, right? So these are nice. I like the metal ones. I've used the plastic ones. They have just too many lips and edges and you get built up dry, crusty mud. So I like ones like this. They actually have ones that they're like a barrel shape, and they're kind of cool too. And that way you don't have to keep digging out of these inside corners. So you want to use that. Now, a 6-inch putty knife. This is good for, sometimes I'll use it for after I install my corner beads. I'll just give it a quick coat with like a 6-inch. Go on to the inside corner trowel. I used this when I first started as well, and I learned how to do a lot of my mudding with one of these. But there's pros and cons to this. Let's put it this way, professionals just use a 4-inch putty knife. They do one side of the angle, they wait till the next day, do the other side. This eliminates that. You can do it with one coat. This is an 8-inch, I guess you'd call it just a knife, putty knife. I just like to use those after I've installed my tape on my flats. I like to use this one just to give it a nice fill so I don't go too wide, but that's about the extent that I'll use one of these. The hawk is good because you can always just keep turning your mud. You don't get crusties or hitchhikers. You can just keep turning mud into itself and just always keeping it moist. So that was a 12-inch trowel. This is an 18-inch. You can some guys call them a derby. You can get them longer too. This is basically what I use for renovations. If I have to really span a butt joint out really huge, or whatever, renos, there's usually some odd stuff going on. This will help me blend something out really big. You're going to need some tin snips for some corner beads, tape measure. You'll probably need a stapler. We'll go through that as well for corner beads for the vinyl ones. And I think I'll just hold off, but sometimes you fall into perhaps using some contact cement. I'll go through that when I do the beads. And then you're going to need a drill and a mixer to mix up your mud. Okay, I'm just going to run through the terminology while you're taping just so you know what I'm talking about as we go. Now, this is a butt joint, so this is where just two sheets butt together, right? This we refer to as a flat. Now these are where the factory bevel edges hit each other, and I think they probably call that because after you put your tape in a couple coats, it still stays flat. Then you have corner beads, so any outside corner or maybe even inside corners for that matter. These are called angles, so an inside corner, typically a 90-degree. Now, keep in mind those, normally I just stay with tape. You can get corner beads for those, but I just stay with the tape. And did I miss anything? Nope. I think so. Now let's just go through some corner beads. This is your typical, your two most typical ones are just, well, they're metal on the, to actually give it the strength, and then the paper over top to allow for application and for it to bond to the mud. This is for outside 90, so that's probably one of your most common, or the rounds. So the round ones come in different radiuses. This is the bigger radius. I think it's a 3/4, and they come with half, and there's all sorts of types of those. Here's an outside 45 paper bead. Those are good for outside 45s. Then you go into, if you have an inside 45, one of those. Now, these ones are good, but then we get into the vinyl ones, and I found this one out. This one's actually really handy because it doesn't necessarily have to be a 45. You can kind of bend it if it's a sharper angle, or you can flatten it out. Plus, it has this little ridge here, and it's a lot easier to set it to the angle and make sure, like when we do it, you'll see you have to make sure that it's not offset so that the mud always fills it. Like, I'm not iterating myself well enough, but you'll see what I mean. These are better because on this one, when you do one side at a time, it's hard not to travel into the other side of the angle, and then it's hard to get a nice straight line, right? Whereas this one I find to be better just because it does have this lip here. So this one's kind of good for that. It's really neat. Now these are just some other vinyl ones. I don't typically use vinyl ones for outside 90s and that. I don't typically like them. They work just as well. Here's a chamfer. So it's a 45-degree outside bead. Those are actually, they're becoming a lot more popular. These are really cool. This is a smaller style, and so is this one. Now, the reason I don't really care for the vinyl ones, although I do like this one, and I've used the chamfer ones before, is because you need contact cement. Now, this is a spray contact cement. Now, I've used it once. I didn't really, like, it works well, it bonds well, but here's a couple of downfalls. This stuff, when you spray, it actually ends up getting overspray everywhere else. Then it's hard to get off the drywall, right? So I don't like using it for that. Plus, when you're setting a bead, like I said before, you need each side of the corner to stick out further than the drywall to allow mud to cover this part of it. While we're on the topic of this vinyl, after experiencing it and using it with the contact cement, I think I would probably eliminate it altogether. I would staple it really well. That way, like I said, I don't have any bulges. It's not affecting my coating. Then I would use a really good taping drywall mud, because a taping mud bonds really hard and it doesn't flex. Or maybe even a confill, and we'll get to that when we explain the drywall mud. That way you don't want it to crack, right? So yeah, it just seems like the contact cement is just a little too labor intensive for this. Now we're going to get into some, well, this is called Milcor. This is a new one that I've seen. Typically the Milcor that I've seen before is just silver metal, right? And this is used for, let's say you have like a finished wall, right? Let's say that's like either brick or finished wood or whatever, and you're adding a bedroom and you have some drywall that's butting into it, but you don't want to mud and tape onto there, but you do want a nice clean finished look. Now, one way to do that is to use this Milcor, put it on before you install your drywall, butt it in, right? Now you'd probably have to get fancy and tape this off, but now you can kind of mud that out like you would, kind of like an outside corner bead. This one, isn't necessarily my favorite because you have to put it on before the drywall. Yeah, that makes sense. You put it on before the drywall goes on the wall. Now, that's kind of a pain in the butt. So this is one that I learned about just a little while ago. This is called tearaway. This stuff is awesome. This, what you would do is you would install your drywall, leave about an 1/8 inch gap. Then when you come time to do all your coating, you do all your tapes first. Then you come time to do your beads and this kind of stuff. The big end here fits into the drywall side. And then this little end here, I'll show you better. This end here, as you can see, is the tearaway portion. How that works is this fits in there like so, against your finished wall. Staple that on. Now this has a little lip that you can ride your mud on so that the mud covers this. Then what you can do is you can do it one of two ways. You always leave this tab on while you're coating, and you leave it on while you sand it, right? So when you're totally finished sanding, you have two options. You can rip it off now, then paint it, or you can paint all your walls and then rip this away after. There's just a slight issue when you rip it away after, is there's just the tiniest little white line from where it was connected there. But this stuff is just so incredible. It does a really nice professional finish when you're butting it up, and you know, it can hide gaps and flaws in this edge. So that's really cool trick to use. So with that, hopefully that gives you enough info on beads. There's all sorts of beads. There's pretty much anything you can think of. There's little outside three-way corner caps and everything like that to make it easier. So you can do your research on that, and we're just going to get in. I'll show you the different types of mud to use too. So let's go through mixing your drywall mud. Whether you buy it in a bucket, which is probably handier for you, or if you buy it in a box like this, no matter what, you should mix it to the proper consistency, and we'll go through that as we tape. Now, the pre-filled buckets are nice because you have a bucket built in. You don't have to buy them separately. But in this scenario, I have my blue bucket that matches my blue mud. Unfortunately, I already have some mud in there, because what I wanted to show you is how to fill a bucket if you are buying a box. And all you have to do is just rip it open, get this out of here. You just fold these over top, then you just dump the box upside down over the bucket. Now I don't have room for that, so I'm just going to take out a few scoops. See how thick this stuff is? I actually had a guy tell me that he installed or did his own mudding and taping with this kind of mud. He's like, man, my arms were sore. So that's why you want to mix it, to avoid that, and man, it really helps your life by having a good consistency. I want to cover this and get this bag wrapped back up, just so that it doesn't dry on me and get little hitchhikers in my mud later. What's nice about buying mud in a box like this is that the box can be used for waste, dry chunks and garbage, etc. later. So I'm just going to see what the consistency is like with this other mud that's in here. It's not bad, it's a little bit thick, but let's just check it with our knife. It's pretty good. Like this is, this would be a good consistency for filling your outside corner beads, stuff like that. But for taping, you want it a little more runny, and that's just because it can flow in behind your tape. Your tape will sit flatter, closer to your drywall. That way you don't have to fan out your butt joints and that as much. So we'll just get this right to the proper consistency, and it'll always dry out a bit too as you work with it and use it. And same when you're applying your tapes. the more moist it is, when you apply it to your dry wall, it dries it out as you go. So the more you're applying tape, you're wiping it out. It dries out a bit and you mix it in with old mud, right? So it just gives you a little more allowance because it is moist. Now if it was dry, it's only going to get drier. So let's just try this. That looks really good. It's not quite dripping all over the place, so it's not like water, but I can tell that it's going to flow nice. And I always make sure that I scrape this mud that's on the walls of my bucket, and I scrape it down and keep it low so it doesn't get crusties either. So next step is essentially apply all your tapes, then do your corner beads. So I'll just get cleaned up and ready to do this. So if you want to kind of keep an order of when you're taping, you can kind of think of it this way. You do your butt joints first, and that's because they could go past and into the flat or into the angle a bit. Then, because these are dented in a bit, they can overlap that tape. It doesn't really matter, but it's just one way you can look at it. Then, it is good to do your flats and end them at your inside corners. Do your inside corners last. Then after all your tapes are done, then do your corner beads. Now I just want to touch on these gaps here. These aren't that bad. We could use confill. Now you could use confill just straight up out of the bag, mix it with water, and just do a little bit to fill these. Or you can put confill in with your mud. So what I like to do there is pre-mix it again, just like a little handful in with water, get that mixed, then add your mud and mix it again. It's too hard to get it throughout your mud if you just put the dry powder in. So just think of it that way. Confill mixed with mud is good for putting your beads on, or even just doing a first coat on your beads. But anyway, let's just get to this. So I'll just do this butt joint first. And what I like to just take the butt end of this and dent this butt joint in just a little bit. Now this is a rule of thumb when I'm doing all taping or beads, is when you apply your mud, make sure that you can't see through it into the paper. And I'll show you. So I'll show you an example if it's too thin. Right? Like right here, you can see the paper. It's too thin. There's not enough mud to bond the tape and you'll get blisters. So I always just try to do a nice even coat. And that rule is always in the back of my mind. I just has to totally cover the drywall mud. A good way, you can do this two ways. You can put the tape right over the mud and cut it off with your knife. Now, the only problem with that is on the part that's left over on your reel usually has a little bit of mud on it, right? So it could get a little messy. So sometimes I like to just do it beside where I'm going. I don't have to run all the way through, I'll just get it close to that joint. Boom. Then I'll just tag this top side dead center. And also, all your tape is folded one way, so that allows to do your angles. And there's usually little bumps on here. So you always want to apply the tape so that the fold is against the drywall, right? Not the other way around. So you just kind of line that up center. Then what I like to do is just get the top set so it doesn't try to move down on me. It's a little tricky in the corners. And then you sometimes want to just hitch it with your finger just so it doesn't slide down. I'll do a nice even amount of pressure. I noticed that it was going to squish off the sides and fall, so I just stopped that. Oh, like that. Now with taping, I'm not too worried about hitchhikers, but when I start doing my coats, then I get worried about it. So I didn't push overly hard, just enough so that I know that I'm fairly tight. If you squish all the mud out, then you'll get blisters, and you'll notice your blisters when you go to coat over top of this. The tape gets moist, and then you'll see the air bubbles. Another thing with butt joints is if you do have a gap, sometimes if it's a decent gap, what I like to do is now I'll push it in, the tape in with my finger to kind of dent it in. Then I'll make it flat with the knife again, and that just ensures that it doesn't bubble out on the gap. Instead, it would be bubbling in. So I'm just going to go on either side to make sure that that's tight. So we've done that. Now we'll do this this flat. So I'm just going to mix in some of this old mud into this new stuff. Now a 4-inch knife is good to use in these because it just fits inside the bevel. 6 inches would ride right on the actual full dimension of drywall. So I like to use the 4-inch because it kind of fits inside, makes the tape lower than the surface of the drywall. So we'll just apply this to the end, so that way when you put your corner beads on, it overlaps that tape. And then I just kind of go over it once again just to kind of even out the mud so it's not all up and down. Okay. Now the more experienced you get, the longer you can put your tapes on without any issues. This wall we should be able to do easily with one piece of tape. Now, as I was learning, I would just do it in chunks, right? If I had a 20-foot wall, I'd do it in 3 pieces, right? That way I'm not trying to fight with the tape. So I'll just put that there. We'll just hold it in the corner. I'll actually bend it in the angle there. Then I can cut it. And you just kind of want to feel for the center. You want to tag that there. And you want to find the centers pretty much dead on right here. And you can kind of just tag that. And just kind of push lightly on the tape. Because if it's off kilter, it'll just continue and you'll go right off of your joint. So then you either just cut it and put it on square or that kind of thing. You just want to stay as dead center over that gap as possible. So I'm just going to start down here. I'm just going to kind of get it tagged here. Notice how it's rippling there. I'm just going to pull that this way into that inside corner. I definitely want to avoid those. Okay, now I should be able to just go all the way that way. And now that it's set straight, we should be good. Right? And one way to check to see if you've done a good job is just take a trowel or a straight edge, like this 8-inch knife, and just put it just like that. So I know that I can actually see daylight in behind there, so I know that my tape is below the surface of the drywall. That's what you want on your flats. Now we can do our angles, and we're good. So what I'm going to do, better just put these on. I'll show you how to do it, right? That's why we're here, so I'll show you how to do it pro. Okay. Now this is a good thing to keep in mind when you do have gaps in your angles, is I want to do the top first, because when I'm applying my mud, my knife will go into that gap. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean. I'll do that now. It'll fill that gap up. Then I want to do this part last. Oop. So that I have a nice even amount of mud on each side. Because if I do it the other way around, if I set my mud nice on this side first and then go to do that, the corner of my knife digs out all the mud. Okay? So we'll do that. That's just something, well, it just makes your life so much easier when you know that. So I'll put that on. Always making sure that you can't see the drywall, you can't see through your mud. You don't have to go, like since I have some more experience, this looks pretty even. It doesn't have to be super even until you get both sides on. Then you can go over it, even it out. That way, because now, let's say I got this perfectly evened. Then I go to do this. Well, I wrecked the other side. Now I got to go over this again. So don't waste too much time getting it perfect until you just have your mud applied. So let's just do this. We'll pick up the paste. Now, this is another really good example. In order to prevent digging out too much from the other side, don't hold your knife perfectly square like this. I like to angle it so that this part of my knife isn't dragging all of this mud out. So I'll get it on the corner, all the mud there. I'll angle my knife down like so, and you can see it's not digging out the other side. And you can see why now, if you have, mud that's quite fluid, why it's so important, because it's taken a while to get that. If your mud was kind of mediocre dry or almost dry, it'd be hard to apply this tape now that we've worked with it so much. Okay. I actually kind of like doing angles with the tape. It's actually quite easy, as long as you don't apply too much mud. Kind of want to make sure that this is sitting in nice, because if you push too hard with your knife, it will cut through and you kind of defeat the purpose of the tape. So here's another thing. If you have a brand new knife and you're doing angle tapes, good chance that you'll cut right through it because your corners of your knife are so sharp. So you could rough it up on the concrete or on a wall, or take some sandpaper to the corners or whatever. And just keep that in mind as well. So we're going to just get the excess out and make sure that I don't have any chunks on the wall either. I'll just give this one quick and you can see here, this is the edge, this is I guess the start of the bevel. So all this mud from here to there is bevel. So essentially this is nice and flush with the wall. It's not built out. That's why it's good to put bevel to an inside corner. Okay, I think what I'll do is you should get the gist of that. I'll finish these tapes out, and then I learned a good trick from my good friend Chad. He's also on the website. He likes to pre-fill his 3-way inside corners, and I'll show you that. Now my good friend Chad, who's a professional taper, he taught me this trick. So after your angle tapes are on and you have this three-way angle, what he likes to do is pre-fill 3 of the sides, so 3 of the opposite sides, because when you're doing your coating, it always kind of gets messed up in the inside corner, right? So he likes to just, he'll pre-fill this side and just do all the opposites of each other, kind of like this. Basically saves them a step. And with drying times and that, it saves you a lot of time as well. So I'm just going to get rid of the excess along the edge. Then I'll try to get this coated. Now same thing goes when you're coating. Instead of going square like this, just start to tilt it so that you don't drag the mud out of the other side of the corner. Now with this little line here, if you can see that, what I like to do is just put lots of pressure on the right side of my knife, pretty much all the pressure on there, and just go over top of that so that I don't take any mud out of there. Then I'll go to this side, hold down like that, then I gotta hit this again, just lightly. And this top one I just did ever so lightly. So that way I've pre-filled 3 of the corners. Now I've saved myself a step. Now those are that much more complete. Then I can do the opposite sides of those when I do my first coat. So just don't forget to do all your little tape, like all your little joints. Make sure to tape all those before you do your beads. So I did this one and this one over here. Now we're ready to do our beads. Now since my theoretical bulkhead is, we're going to do 90-degree stuff on there, I've pre-cut these beads. Now I use my tape measure, but you can just hold it up and cut it with your snips. Now this one, what I have to do, oh yeah, see, this is, I was misthinking. This one is also a bead. So what I have to do is, this is a 3-way outside corner. I'm just gonna 45 all of these. I'm just gonna eyeball it. You can use a square with a 45-degree on it if you want. I'm just gonna guesstimate it. The only thing with this is you don't want them overlapping, basically. You can be a little bit bigger than a 45-degree. And then just keep in mind when you're doing these is after you cut it, make sure that you bend the metal inward, like so. So I'll do that. And another thing you could do is just trace this so that when you hold your other 2 chunks up that you've mitered, you know that you're not going to overlap. Okay? And with these beads, they don't have to be super tight. Like, it doesn't have to be an ultra fit. Like, if you're a 1/16 away from this angle over here, not a big deal. Like, it doesn't have to be dead on. It's not like you're finishing with hardwood or something. So I'll keep continuing with this. We'll come back to that and we'll show you how to install these. So I've got my mud applied for my beads. Now I can get away with a little bit less than normal because my corners are so square and flush, right? Now I would highly recommend that if they aren't, like if your corners are back a 1/4 inch or so, I would pre-fill them with some confill. It is harder to do when they're not perfectly square, right? And another point here is to add, right now, I don't think I have, when your sheets come and you rip the little tabs off the sides and there's that little paper, you have to totally get rid of that paper if you're going to use that part of the drywall for an outside corner. Because if there is that little flap and mud doesn't get behind it, it'll be like a permanent blister there. So you have to do that. So hopefully you know what I mean. So once again, my rule of thumb, I can't see through my mud. I've slightly used more mud than I would on my tapes. And now we'll just get to it. Now I'll just put these on. Now what I like to do is just push on the metal to make sure that I don't have too much mud. Otherwise, what it'll do, I'll show you on this here. If you have too much mud there, it'll flare the metal out and your drywall mud won't cover. So that's why I like to squish right on the metal part and just get any mud that's in there. Don't want too much excess in there, okay? So that's on there. You noticed right here, take a look at that, I need more mud on there. Okay. So yeah, I put lots on there, so I want to make sure I get rid of that. These little chunks are harder to do than anything. Just gonna bring my bucket over here. I don't want my mud getting dry, so I'm just gonna kind of try to hurry up here. I'm just gonna get this in place. Squish that metal, get all the excess out so that it doesn't mess me up. And you can kind of rock it so that it kind of fits square. Now beads are pretty easy to do, just have to keep a few rules in mind. Okay, so for this, I'm going to make a mess, I know that. I want these three ways to match as best as possible. Okay, when I first started doing beads, the way I did it is I'd wipe the excess out this way, all the way along, right? So I can do that right there. Then I would do it over here in the same spot. Wipe the mud off. Then what you want to do is you want to hold your knife and make sure that you have daylight in here. If not, your bead's off-centered or not square, what have you, then you're not filling there. You're actually going to see this whole bead. You want to cover it, obviously, right? So we have daylight there. You want to make sure you have daylight here. I don't have quite as much, so I'll just shift that bead up a little bit and maybe even just push a little harder there. You want to just shift that, so now I have daylight there and I have some daylight there. Then I'm going to check it down here. Make sure I have daylight here. Good. See, I got to shift that a little. Good and good. Now, you can continue to wipe that way, or what I've learned to do is I don't wipe straight square. I just kind of angle it so that when the mud pushes, it actually comes up and out, right? If I go square, it'll just keep the mud inside that bead. So just angle it, go like that, and it's a lot quicker. But just do whatever way works for you. Then double check. Always double check to make sure you got daylight. And if you can do that, your corners are going to look awesome. Now we'll just get rid of this pesky little nugget one. Daylight. I'm good there, and I'm good there. I'm good here, good there, there, there. Okay. Now I'm just going to check this one in a couple of spots, probably just in the middle. That's good. Right, and then my mud's starting to stiffen up on me. Shift that down a little. And with a bigger knife, it'll show more daylight, right? So I'm just going to give this one coat. Like I said before, you want to angle that up, kind of like when you're shoveling your driveway. Kind of pushes, gets that mud out of the bead. I'll do it, you know, I'm putting a decent amount of pressure on, but not everything I got. Okay, so now is the time to double check. And then if I'm good, I'll swipe it once more. It's pretty much the key to doing beads. It's just this right here. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do, I don't know if I will. See, like we're getting up the end of the day. I'm going to put the round bead, the chamfer bead on. That'll set up a bit more. And I just want to kind of pre-fill this so that I don't have any high spots that are going to catch when I do my coating. So if I can just pre-fill that a bit, I think it'll save me a step down the road. So I'll get these corners cut and ready. Okay, so time for our vertical beads, so our round and our chamfer. I've cut these to length. Now, the reason I did the square first is because it's square, and so that I can just butt these into those. Then I have an accurate measurement to go from here. Now, I leave these beads about 1/2 inch off the ground as well, the same as my drywall. I don't want to go any higher than that because it is a bugger when you go to finish and do your baseboards. You don't want it way up off the ground because then your baseboards kick in at the bottom and it's harder to finish and it's harder to get measurements. So you do want those low, and when you coat, you want to coat right down to the bottom as well. You don't want to leave it up, or you don't want to leave all your excess of your mud out at the bottom too, and we'll show you that. So I'm just going to coat this. I got this cut. Gonna just, yeah, put that on pretty liberal. Oh dang. If you have clean floors as well, then you can scoop it up off the ground, but if your floors are just treacherously dirty, I wouldn't do it, but you don't have to be as critical on your tape coats. Forgot my own rule. Forgot to put tape on there. I'll just grab a chunk and do that right now. See? Oh, and while I'm doing this, just take a good look at this tape on the flat You see right down the seam, it kind of bubbles in and out a little bit. That's okay because it will shrink overnight as it dries. Just take a good look. That's okay. Okay. I think what I'm going to do, no you don't have to, but I'm just going to fill this up a little bit because sometimes what will happen is on a round corner, if you do hit the outside of your wall, it can dent the actual metal portion of your bead in, therefore you have a dent in your wall. So a little bit of mud in there might prevent that from happening as bad. Pour this lightly, get rid of any major excess. Even it out. Same thing, you can kind of rock this one back and forth to get it square. Get the round corner square. Get it? Okay. Just gonna. And same thing goes with this. They have that little ridge so you can give you some daylight there. So I'll just set this top. Daylight, daylight. These ones are really nice to do. I got a nice amount of mud on there too. Now this one, I'm not riding right on the corner. I'm riding just before it so it'll squish the mud out. Okay, so got lots of daylight. Careful not to snag that tape as you go over it. And with this bead as well, when you cut it, it kind of goes, it flattens it out a bit, so you want to get it back into shape. Make sure you bend the metal corners inward. Okay, that's how that should look. Double check everything. Don't assume. You know what that does. Perfect. That one's set, it's up high, tight into here. Actually what I can do is I can just pre-fill and kind of get that shape of this corner a little bit. I'll scrape it off the round part. That's not bad, it's not perfect, but just to kind of give me a little shape right there. I can tweak it with sandpaper if I need. Then when I go do the other coats, it's easier. Let's figure out this chamfer here. It's cut to length. This one's going to fit pretty nicely. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, you know what, you can kind of tell how it fits. Just going to staple it. Going to staple it on. We're not going to contact cement it. So just kind of rock it. I'm just not going to go crazy yet. I want to make sure that I have daylight. So I'll do it about 4 spots. Yeah, don't ever try to put this stuff on like the paper beads. It just waves too much and you won't get it nice and flat on the wall. You kind of need, you need to staple it on. Okay, so I'll make sure we have daylight. You can tell with this stuff, it sits out nice. Okay, so I'm going to go to town on that. Then I'm going to make my mud a little more runny, and I'm just going to work it right in so it squishes right in behind all of that. Alright, I stapled that. I wasn't stingy. Now we're going to just work this mud into there. You can see how much runnier it is. I don't even, is that a word? Yeah, you want to get that nice in there. Yeah, so just work it in there. And then what I'll probably do is do the initial, like I'll do basically almost a first coat on it. I might even just use my 6-inch knife just so it builds it out a bit further, and that way when I go to coat again, the mud isn't as thick, it doesn't take quite as long to dry. Well, I'm going to try to just pre-fill around this corner. That looks pretty decent. Staple is sticking out. I want to get rid of that. That's pretty decent there. Those little corners like that, if you can do them sooner than later, it'll save you time. I want to get rid of any of that excess down there, but I also don't want to start my mudding up here. I also don't want big bulges out. I want it nice mud job right down there, and your finisher will help that, or if you're, your finisher will appreciate that, and if you're finishing it yourself, you'll really appreciate it. I think we're looking good. Let's actually pre-fill this outside corner, because now, even though that mud's not cure, it's that little bead isn't going to move anymore. It's not bad. Get that right out to that outside corner. Even if I leave a little bulb on there like that, I can sand that tomorrow, as long as it's not giant. Just like that. And I can tweak that, and then that nice corner out there. Okay, so everything's pre-filled. It's nice to do that, it'll save you time down the road. So we're good. We're going to let this mud dry. You don't want to add anything to it now. You want a nice cure so it bonds nice. Then tomorrow when we coat, we'll be able to tell if we have any blisters. We can fix those and start doing our coating. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or check us out on some of the following.